Before the assembled servants and tradesmen, Beatrice Ellison was accused of stealing the Ellison Bible she had spent 6 weeks repairing. The accusation came on a wet November morning in 1874, beneath the painted ceiling of the family bindery in York. Her elder brother Edmund stood behind their father's walnut counter, with one hand resting on the missing volume's empty display cradle. Her younger brother Lionel had arranged the apprentices along the wall as if they were witnesses in a courtroom. Even Mr. Pike, the paper merchant, had been asked to wait. "The cabinet was locked," Edmund said. "You alone had the key." Beatrice kept her hands at her sides. The fingers of her right hand bore the pale scratches of linen thread, and a crescent of gold leaf remained beneath one nail. "I returned the key to your desk on Tuesday. You watched me do it." Lionel laid a prepared statement beside her bone folder. It said she had removed the Bible in grief and confusion, intending no permanent harm. If she signed, the family would not call a constable. She would receive £20 and leave York before Sunday. Their father had been dead 9 days. In his final year, while illness clouded his judgment, Edmund had taken charge of Ellison and Sons and removed Beatrice's name from its accounts. She had expected dismissal. She had not expected a confession. "Where is the book?" she asked. Edmund's expression did not change. "That is what we require you to tell us." Beatrice looked beyond him to the familiar tools: sewing frames, finishing presses, brass wheels, and the worn backing hammer her mother had taught her to use. Margaret Ellison had bound books beside her husband until her death 16 years earlier, though the gilt sign outside had never included her name. She had taught Beatrice to read a volume through its materials, to distinguish honest age from manufactured antiquity and damage from deliberate concealment. The missing Bible had troubled Beatrice from the moment Edmund brought it to her. Its title page declared it printed in 1812, yet 2 end papers were made on a machine not operating in Yorkshire until years later. Under the cracked calfskin, she had felt an uneven ridge along the spine. Before she could lift the leather, Edmund ordered the work stopped. A solicitor named Mr. Vale entered carrying a tin document box. He seemed embarrassed to find an audience. Their father's will left the house, bindery, accounts, and investments to the sons. To Beatrice, it left Blackthorn Printing House in the village of Hallowford, subject to unpaid parish rates of £11, 7 shillings, and 4 pence. A murmur passed among the tradesmen. Everyone knew Blackthorn. A fire had killed its owner, printer Samuel Rooke, and destroyed most of the building in 1858. The shell had stood empty ever since. Edmund pushed the confession nearer. "Sign, and I shall settle the rates as well." The generosity was too precisely measured. Beatrice picked up the deed instead. It described the printing house, yard, stable lean-to, and a strip of riverbank extending to an old ash boundary post. It also mentioned a western composing room 22 feet wide. She remembered Blackthorn from childhood. Its western wall could not contain such a room. She folded the deed and placed it in her reticule. "I will take what father left me." By evening, her trunk stood on the pavement. None of the servants met her eyes except Agnes Cook, who pressed a wrapped loaf into her hands. Beatrice carried her bookbinding kit beneath her cloak. At the corner, she looked back once. Edmund watched from the upper office window, not with triumph, but calculation. Hallowford lay 17 miles north, reached by train to Thirsk and then by carrier's cart. Rain followed Beatrice into the valley. The driver pointed with his whip toward a blackened stone building beside the River Loon. Half its slate roof had fallen, the windows were boarded, the chimney leaned, and elder saplings grew through the loading yard. "Worth less than its rates," he said. "Rooke forged a bishop's seal there. Burned the evidence and himself." Beatrice paid him 6 pence and did not answer. The front door had lost its lower panel. Inside, water ticked into buckets left by some forgotten caretaker. The main press room smelled of soot, wet lime, and rotting timber. A cast-iron Albion press stood beneath the surviving roof, its platen warped by heat. Type lay fused in gray lumps across the floor. She found one room dry enough to inhabit, the former office, protected by a stone vault above and an intact shutter. Using sacking, paste, and boards scavenged from a cupboard, she stopped the worst draughts. She ate Agnes's bread beside a small fire and studied the deed by lamplight. The measurements were not merely wrong. The western composing room was listed as 22 feet internally, while the exterior wall from corner to corner measured, by her father's folding rule, only 18 feet and 9 inches. Either the deed was false or a portion of the building had been hidden. Near midnight, she opened her bookbinding case. Beneath the awls, knives, and linen thread lay an object she had not packed, a scorched section of leather no larger than her palm. Its blind-tooled border matched the missing Ellison Bible. Agnes must have slipped it into the case with the bread. On its underside, in Margaret Ellison's tight pencil hand, were 4 words: Blackthorn, press bed, rain line. The following morning brought frost and a visitor. Thomas Reed, a thin 12-year-old with red hair and a basket of kindling, said his widowed mother had once cleaned the building for its absentee owner. He had expected to frighten away the new mistress. Instead, he watched Beatrice test the ceiling joists with an awl. "That beam is rotten," he announced. "The awl agrees with you." He showed her a spring behind the river wall where clean water could be collected. In exchange for carrying 2 pails, she gave him breakfast and 6pence to fetch Mason Jonah Bell. Bell arrived reluctantly and refused to enter until Beatrice showed him her plan. Shore the office ceiling, cover one roof bay with salvaged slate, clear the front drain, and leave everything else untouched. "You cannot mend this place with 11 pounds owing," he said. "I have 8 pounds, 13 shillings, and 9pence after travel. I can pay for 2 days now. If the office becomes dry, I can bind books." Bell examined her hands, perhaps expecting softness. 2 days, he said. They worked for a week. Beatrice sorted sound slate from rubble and cleaned soot from the office. Thomas carried messages and learned to mix paste. His mother, Ruth Reed, brought a chair and later entrusted Beatrice with a family prayer book split at the hinges. Beatrice repaired it in view of anyone passing the open shutter. The careful work earned 3 more commissions: a school atlas, a farmer's account book, and the vicar's damaged register. The parish clerk, Mr. Cray, came for the rates. He was surprised when she paid 2 pounds on account and obtained a signed receipt. He told her Edmund Ellison had already offered to purchase Blackthorn if she defaulted. That night, Beatrice studied the press bed. Rain blowing through the roof had washed the floor for years, leaving pale tracks in the soot. Yet beside the Albion press, the damp stopped along a straight edge, precisely as her mother's note said. Beatrice and Thomas lifted 3 loose boards. Below them lay a shallow brick channel, dry despite the river's nearness. It ran west and vanished beneath the wall. They found no treasure. In the channel lay 23 pieces of printer's type wrapped in decayed oilcloth. Beatrice cleaned one. The raised letter appeared backward, as all type must, but the pieces were not ordinary letters. Arranged by their nickmarks, they spelled Samuel Rook in small capitals, followed by the date 1858. Bell believed the channel had carried water to damp paper. Beatrice almost accepted that explanation until she noticed the type had been cast from 2 alloys. The letters of Samuel's name were old, dark, and worn. The date was bright beneath corrosion and cut with the same narrow figure 8 used in Ellison and Sons account labels. Someone had added the date after Rook died. Within days, a letter arrived from Edmund. He expressed concern for her safety and offered 30 pounds for the property. Beatrice laid it beside the parish receipt. The offer exceeded any honest valuation. She replied that Blackthorn was not for sale. Her income grew slowly. Ruth spread word that Beatrice charged fairly, and the schoolmistress, Miss Nora Hale, brought 12 primers ruined by damp. Beatrice could not afford new leather, so she used strong linen and pasteboards made from clean waste paper. The repairs were plain but durable. Miss Hale paid 1 pound and asked whether the unused office might host evening reading lessons once the roof was safe. The proposition gave the building a purpose larger than survival. Beatrice agreed, though she warned that winter repairs would be slow. While clearing the western corner, Bell exposed a vertical seam. To its right, the mortar was lime and sand. To its left, hard Roman cement had been smeared over older stone. The exterior measurement still denied the room promised by the deed. Beatrice traced the dry brick channel to the seam, but refused to break through until she understood what supported the wall. Her training offered another path. Book structures distribute strain. Boards pull against cords, cords anchor into the spine, and the whole fails when pressure gathers at one hinge. Buildings, Bell said, were not books. Yet when she mapped roof loads and floor joists on waste paper, the western wall behaved like a false board laid across a recessed frame. A short iron tie visible near the ceiling did no structural work. Behind flaking plaster, they uncovered a reversed hinge. Bell levered cautiously while Beatrice pulled the tie. A narrow stone panel opened inward, releasing a breath of dry, dusty air. Beyond lay a room only 3 feet wide, but running the length of the wall. Its false inner face accounted for the impossible dimensions in the deed. The chamber contained racks of flat wooden boards, a small hand press, and 6 copper printing plates wrapped in waxed cloth. No gold waited there. The plates showed devotional borders, certificates, and seals. One bore the arms of the Bishop of Durham, the forgery for which Samuel Rook had been condemned in public memory. Thomas whispered, "Then they told the truth about him." Beatrice held the plate toward the lamp. Its engraved lines were crude. Across one corner, nearly erased, was a tiny binding needle crossed with the letter M. Her mother had used that mark on tools she owned privately. Beatrice's stomach tightened. Margaret had known Blackthorne. She might even have made the plate. Footsteps sounded in the press room. Edmund stood beyond the open panel with 2 men. He wore a city coat unsuited to the mud and held Beatrice's refusal letter. "You see now why Father wished this place forgotten," he said. Beatrice moved between him and the plates. "Father left it to me." A clerical kindness, easily corrected. Those objects belonged to the Ellison business. Mr. Vale had arrived with him, but the solicitor's eyes remained on the floor. Beatrice produced the deed and asked him to read the boundary. He confirmed that fixtures and contents within Blackthorne belonged to its owner unless another claim could be proved. Edmund's pleasant mask slipped. "You are defending a forger." "I am preserving evidence." Bell entered carrying a mason's mallet. Ruth and Thomas followed. Edmund saw that removal would have witnesses. He ordered his men away, but before leaving he said the unpaid rates would bring an auction by spring. That evening Beatrice examined every plate. The bishop's plate differed from the others in copper thickness and engraving technique. Its screw holes matched no press in the chamber. It had been planted among Rook's equipment. The remaining plates belonged to legitimate work: apprenticeship certificates, hymn sheets, temperance notices, and decorative end papers. Waxed packets on a high shelf held paper fragments, most spoiled at the edges but dry within. One was a proof sheet printed from the alleged forgery. The seal was blacked out with ink, and beside it Samuel had written, "Plate brought by J.E., refused 14 March. J.E. could have been James Ellison, Beatrice's father. She slept little. By morning she had decided not to hide the discovery. She asked Miss Hale and the vicar, Reverend Shaw, to witness an inventory. Shaw came unwillingly, concerned that scandal would injure the parish, but when Beatrice showed him the plate and Samuel's note, he agreed to sign a list without endorsing her conclusions. The vicar also opened church records. Samuel Rook had been buried in unconsecrated ground after an inquest found that his negligence caused the fire. His daughter Alice disappeared from the parish soon afterward. Margaret Ellison's maiden name was Ward, not Rook, and at first the record seemed to end there. Miss Hale found the connection in a school attendance book. Margaret Ward, age 13, guardian Alice Ward, formerly Alice Rook. Samuel had been Beatrice's great-grandfather. The discovery transformed the inheritance. Blackthorn was not an insult selected at random. It was a line of evidence passed from Margaret to her daughter through a will James Ellison might have misunderstood or been forced to honor. Beatrice needed more than ancestry. A family connection did not clear Samuel's name or prove the Ellisons had profited from forgery. She returned to the Bible fragment. Margaret's note referred to the rain line, which had led to the channel. But why hide type spelling Samuel's name? She arranged the 23 pieces on the composing stone. The letters left over after the name and date formed no phrase until Thomas accidentally turned one sideways. Their nick marks, not the letters, made a sequence of long and shortcuts. Beatrice recognized gathering marks used by binders to keep folded sheets in order. The sequence directed them: third rack, second board, sixth packet. Inside that packet were folded sheets from an unbound book. Each bore a faint mirror impression, as if pressed against fresh ink. Beatrice dusted one with fine charcoal, then used thin, damp paper and a bone folder to take a gentle counterproof. Lines emerged. Payments from a charitable printing fund established to produce cheap Bibles and school books for northern parishes. The entries named Samuel Rook as printer and James Ellison as distributing agent. According to the figures, James had received hundreds of pounds in paper subsidies. Samuel's marginal notes said much of the paper never arrived. A final entry accused James of substituting inferior stock and selling the good sheets privately. The records explained a fortune, but counterproofs were fragile evidence. The original account book remained missing. The Bible, Beatrice suspected. Its oversized spine could conceal folded sheets. Edmund's accusation had removed both Beatrice and the book before she opened it. Her chance of recovering it diminished when Parish Clerk Cray posted formal notice. Unless the remaining rates were paid by February, Blackthorn's movable goods would be seized. Beatrice had £6 left after materials and wages. Winter commissions might cover daily expenses, not the debt. Edmund's second offer rose to £60. This time he wrote that refusal would expose their mother as Samuel Rook's accomplice. Beatrice burned no part of the letter. She placed it in the inventory box. She expanded her work rather than retreat. Miss Hale moved evening lessons into the office twice a week. Ruth sewed simple bookcloth covers. Thomas learned to fold sections and beat down swelling. Beatrice paid them from each commission, keeping exact accounts. Farmers who distrusted scandal nevertheless brought ledgers because her repairs endured. At Christmas, the office held 11 adult pupils around a borrowed stove. Blackthorn's shell remained bleak, yet lamplight shone through its repaired shutter for the first time in 16 years. Then someone cut the tarred canvas covering the roof. Rain flooded the workroom overnight. 6 customer books were damaged, along with Miss Hale's primers. Beatrice spent 30 hours separating wet pages, changing blotting paper, and pressing warped boards. She refunded 2 customers from her rates money. Her hands cracked and bled in the cold. Belle found boot marks leading toward the road, but no name could be attached to them. Cray remarked publicly that a woman living alone in a condemned building invited misfortune. Several customers withdrew their work. Beatrice blamed herself for placing other people's property at risk. She proposed closing the bindery until spring. Ruth refused to let her. The damaged prayer book, she said, had survived because Beatrice repaired it. People could see the same was true of Blackthorn. Belle brought salvaged slates without charge, but insisted on recording their value as a loan. Miss Hale organized pupils to clear the drain. Reverend Shaw paid in advance for rebinding parish registers. Their aid was practical, limited, and earned. During repairs, Thomas found a brass chase lodged in the gutter. It could only have been placed there recently. Inside it, printer's furniture had been arranged to frame a Bible-sized rectangle. One wooden spacer carried a smear of blue sealing wax, identical to wax on Edmund's letters. The sabotage had also exposed a clue. Water running down the western chamber wall revealed lettering written in alum ink. When warmed carefully, it darkened. A.W. kept the witness copy beneath the poor law. Alice Ward, Samuel's daughter, had kept another record. Halliford's old poor law documents had been transferred to the Union Workhouse at North Allerton. Beatrice could not leave Blackthorn unsecured, so Miss Hale traveled with Reverend Shaw to inquire. They returned with news that most volumes had gone to a paper dealer 10 years earlier. One surviving admission register recorded Alice Rook entering the workhouse with an infant after the fire. The note beside her name read, "Documents retained by relieving officer." The relieving officer had been Matthew Cray, father of the present parish clerk. When confronted, Mr. Cray denied knowing anything. Yet he began avoiding Blackthorn, and 3 days later someone tried to force the hidden chamber. Bell's new lock held. Beatrice faced a moral choice. If Cray possessed Alice's papers, accusing him publicly might make him destroy them. If she remained silent, the auction would deliver every plate and fragment to Edmund. She offered Cray a private bargain. Produce whatever his father retained, and she would distinguish his father's conduct from his own in the inventory. Cray arrived after dark carrying a parcel wrapped in an 1858 newspaper. His father, he said, had believed Alice's papers worthless but feared the Ellisons. Cray had found them years ago and kept them because Edmund paid him £2 annually to report interest in Blackthorn. The parcel contained Alice's sworn statement, witnessed by the relieving officer, and a small key. Alice wrote that James Ellison had demanded Samuel print false certificates authorizing him to collect charitable paper. Samuel refused. James brought a forged bishop's plate and threatened to expose Alice's illegitimate child. On the night of the fire, Alice saw James enter the composing room. Samuel remained inside trying to save his records. The official inquiry never called her because James paid for her removal to the workhouse. Cray's confession implicated Edmund only in surveillance, not the original crime. Beatrice wrote it down and made him sign before Ruth and Reverend Shaw. The key fitted no lock in Blackthorn. Alice's statement ended with a phrase, "Margaret carries the truth in the family word." Bible was never named. Beatrice understood that word meant the Ellison Bible, bound by Margaret around the hidden accounts. Recovering it became essential. She traveled to York with Mr. Vale, who had begun to resist Edmund's demands. He confessed that James Ellison added a codicil leaving Blackthorn to Beatrice after Margaret's death. The codicil required the property never be sold to either son. Mr. Vale had kept that condition from Edmund, but feared losing his profession if he opposed the family openly. At the bindery, Edmund denied them entrance. Lionel appeared at an upper window, pale and agitated. Beatrice called up that the Bible belonged to the estate inventory and that concealment would be raised before the probate court. She did not mention Alice's statement. That evening, Lionel came to their inn. Edmund had removed the Bible to a warehouse, he said. Lionel had believed Beatrice took it until he found Edmund's payment book. Their brother intended to have Blackthorn condemned as dangerous, buy it through an intermediary, and destroy the records. "Why help me now?" Beatrice asked. "Because he means to say I altered father's will." Lionel's fear was selfish, but his knowledge was real. He gave them the warehouse address and agreed to testify if protected from Edmund's debts. Beatrice promised no protection she could not grant. She offered only an accurate account of his cooperation. Mr. Vale obtained a court order preserving the Bible as disputed estate property. A sheriff's officer recovered it before Edmund could move it. The volume arrived at Blackthorn in a locked case on the last day of January. It was magnificent at first glance. Dark calf, raised bands, gold tooling, and silver clasps. Under magnification, Beatrice found that Edmund had begun cutting the spine. He lacked her patience and had split the leather near the tail. The charred fragment from Agnes fitted that gap exactly. Beatrice worked for 3 days before witnesses. She lifted the covering, softened the old adhesive, and separated the false spine without severing the cords. Inside were narrow parchment folds, account sheets, letters, and the original title to Blackthorn. Margaret had protected them with oiled silk and thin sheets of mica against damp and fire. The accounts matched the counterproofs. Receipts showed James selling subsidized rag paper to a London stationer, while Samuel was blamed for delayed charity books. A letter from James to the bishop's secretary attempted to shift suspicion onto Rook. Most decisive was Samuel's signed refusal to print false collection certificates, bearing the same plate impression and witnessed by two journeymen whose descendants still lived in Yorkshire. Margaret's own letter explained the concealment. As a girl, she had seen James remove records after the fire. Years later, employed in his bindery under her guardian's surname, she married him partly to protect her mother and partly because he promised restitution. He never kept that promise. When illness weakened him, Margaret recovered surviving documents from his office and bound them into the family Bible. She marked the copper plate so it could be identified, then arranged for Blackthorn to pass to the child who learned her craft. The legacy was not money alone. Samuel's papers described a cooperative system through which parishes pooled orders, bought paper honestly, and produced durable schoolbooks at low cost. Lists named compositors, pressmen, folders, and binders who were to share profits. James had stolen not only funds, but a working plan for dignified employment. Before Beatrice could present the evidence, Edmund struck. Acting through a surveyor, he petitioned the magistrates to close Blackthorn as structurally dangerous. The order gave Beatrice 48 hours to leave pending inspection. Parish goods were marked for seizure. Bell admitted the leaning chimney was hazardous. Beatrice could not honestly call the whole building safe. She moved customer books, records, and plates to the church under witness. She refused, however, to conceal defects or bribe the surveyor. If Blackthorn survived by dishonesty, its restoration would repeat the crime it exposed. On the second night, a fire began in the stable lean-to. Thomas smelled paraffin and raised the alarm. Villagers formed a bucket line from the river while Bell pulled burning boards away from the press room. Beatrice entered once, against Ruth's cry, not to rescue the copper plates already safe at church, but to bring out Cray, who had been checking parish seizure marks and collapsed in smoke. The fire destroyed the lean-to but spared the main structure. In the mud outside, the constable found a paraffin tin bearing the warehouse mark of Ellison and Sons. A carter testified that Lionel had ordered such tins, but Lionel produced Edmund's written instruction. Edmund had expected his younger brother to bear the blame. Public reckoning came at the Hallowford Assembly Room in March. The magistrate's inquiry addressed the new fire, the property order, and the historic evidence separately. Beatrice presented an unbroken chain. The deed and codicil established ownership. The inventoried chamber fixed the plates at Blackthorn. Samuel's proofs and Alice's witness statement explained the 1858 events. The Bible accounts matched surviving London stationer records obtained by Mr. Vale. The bindings, sewing materials, and Margaret's tool mark established when and how the papers were concealed. Edmund attacked her competence. Beatrice answered by demonstrating the paper dates, watermarks, thread twists, and plate impressions without embellishment. Two independent printers confirmed her observations. Bell described the false wall and dry channel. Reverend Shaw confirmed the inventory. Cray admitted Edmund's payments. Lionel, facing conspiracy charges himself, supplied the instruction concerning paraffin. Edmund's flaw was his belief that everyone could be bought separately. Instead, his payments and instructions joined witnesses who might otherwise have remained silent. The magistrates committed him for trial on charges connected to arson, evidence interference, and conspiracy to obtain the property by fraud. The historical finding could not punish James Ellison, long dead, but the bishop's office formally withdrew the accusation against Samuel Rook after reviewing the records. A notice clearing Samuel's name was read in Hallowford Church. His grave was identified and marked through subscriptions from printers whose forebears appeared in his cooperative list. Lionel escaped the gravest charge because he cooperated, but he did not keep the bindery. Creditors discovered debts concealed beneath Edmund's accounts. Ellison and Sons entered supervised sale. Beatrice purchased only the serviceable sewing frames, hand tools, and type to which she could prove fair title. She declined the family house. The court confirmed Blackthorn as hers. The arson evidence suspended the forced auction, while the recovered charity fund records allowed trustees from 3 parishes to negotiate restitution from the Ellison estate. Beatrice did not receive a fortune. Her lawful share, unpaid wages, and a modest settlement totaled £186. Enough for stability, not miracles. She used it by stages. Bell dismantled the dangerous chimney in April and rebuilt only the upper courses. Summer brought a sound roof over the office, western chamber, and half the press room. The remaining bays stayed closed behind braced doors. A second-hand press arrived in September, paid partly by subscriptions from schools that placed advance orders. Ruth became manager of folding and sewing, with wages entered openly. Thomas apprenticed under terms Miss Hale read aloud before he signed. Instruction, meals, escalating pay, and no unpaid night labor. 2 former Ellison apprentices came north after the York sale. Beatrice hired one immediately and told the other honestly that work might exist after winter. The first Blackthorn edition was not a grand Bible. It was a 32-page reading book containing local measures, river safety, letters, and simple accounts. Its paper was strong, its type clear, and its price within reach of laborers attending evening lessons. On the final page appeared a small device, a binding needle crossed with an M, beside Samuel Rook's restored name. Some villagers continued to call the place unlucky. Beatrice did not argue. She showed them roof receipts, wage books, and finished volumes. Trust gathered more slowly than gossip, but it held better. By the second autumn, Blackthorn employed 7 people 3 days a week and hosted lessons on 2 evenings. The cooperative plan was adapted rather than worshipped. Parish schools combined orders, workers shared a quarterly surplus after repairs and reserves, and every account could be inspected by members. The hidden chamber became a dry archive with a barred door and catalog, not a shrine or secret vault. Mr. Vale brought the formal notice clearing Samuel and asked where it should hang. Beatrice chose the public reading room, beside Alice's statement and Margaret's letter. The copper forgery plate remained locked away, displayed only for instruction in how evidence might be read. One winter evening, Beatrice finished restoring the Ellison Bible. She did not return its deceptive grandeur. The repaired spine showed a narrow line of darker leather where the scorched fragment had been joined, honest evidence of injury and survival. On the pasted down, she added a factual note listing every document once hidden inside and where it was archived. Thomas, taller now and careful with his tools, carried the Bible to the shelf. Children sounded out words around the stove. Ruth checked the week's wages. From the press room came the measured pull and release of the press, no longer silent. Beatrice stepped outside. Blackthorn's western wall was patched in 3 colors of stone, and the roof line remained uneven. Light filled the windows that had been boarded when she arrived. Across the yard, the old ash boundary post put out a small green shoot, despite the frost. She had once believed restoration meant making damage disappear. Her mother's work, Samuel's records, and the building itself had taught her otherwise. A sound repair did not deny the break. It held the truth securely enough for life to continue around it. Behind her, the press descended, met paper, and rose. The first fresh sheets of another school book were lifted into waiting hands.